Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will make you exceedingly numerous. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of people shall come to her. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 people standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed to the ground. He said, My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes. Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them. He stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, Where is your wife Sarah? And he said, There in the tent. Then one said, I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh? And say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, Oh yes, you did laugh. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, Who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
Hi everyone, welcome to Virtual Sunday School for Sunday, October 11th. Thank you to Pastor Pete, Vicar Garth, and our special friends that helped to tell today's story about Abraham and Sarah and God's big plan for their lives. We first met Abraham and Sarah last week when they were actually called Abram and Sarai. It's amazing to think that the same God who made the whole world also has a plan and cares for each person in it, including you. But it's true. We see from our story that God has plans for all people. We learned about God's plan for Abraham, his wife Sarah, and the generations that followed them. Generations means their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and on and on. Watch this short video that retells part of today's story.
Stories of the Bible. Abram to Abraham. This is Abram, who will later be known as Abraham.
Hey!
When Abram was in the land called Canaan, God told him to look over the land as far as his eyes could see. God promised that the land would be blessed and that Abram would have many children. 25 years passed. Abram and Sarai were very old and still had no children. God appeared to Abram and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm your shield. A son is coming. Look at the heavens and count the stars. Someday you will have as many children as there are stars in the sky." Then God told Abram that his name would no longer be Abram, but it would be Abraham, which means father of many nations. God also told Abraham that Sarai's name would be changed to Sarah. God promised to bless Sarah and told Abraham that she would become pregnant and have a son. God made a covenant with Abraham that day. His covenant was a promise that Abraham would have many sons and they would be blessed.
Wow, a lot happens in today's story, doesn't it? Abram and Sarai's names are changed to Abraham and Sarah. God made a promise to Abraham and Sarah that they would have many descendants, but by this time they were old enough to be great-grandparents. Then 3 visitors appear outside Abraham and Sarah's tent who they feed and care for. One of those visitors tells Abraham that Sarah will have a son. So when Sarah heard she was going to have a baby, what did she do? Right, Sarah laughed. I wonder if we can get you to laugh like Sarah. I'm going to ask Anthony and Justin to help me tell you some jokes and see if we can get you to laugh. Anthony and Justin, come on over here.
How does the ocean say hello? It waves! Why did the bee want to get married? Because he wanted to find his honey. Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. And why do shoemakers go to heaven? Because they have good souls?
Okay, did we make you laugh at all? Why do you think Sarah laughed? She laughed because she thought she was much, much too old to have a baby. And remember that Abraham was old too. He was already 99 years old. So at the age of 99, Abraham gets a new name and a fresh promise that God will build a nation from Abraham's offspring. Genesis chapter 17 verses 3 and 4 says, "Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, 'As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations.'" Let's have Anthony and Justin help us add actions to our Bible verse. You can follow along and do what we do at home. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you." You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. Good job, guys. Well, 3 visitors come with the news that Sarah will be a mom, and that made her laugh. Later, when she had her baby, Sarah named him Isaac, which means laughter. How do you think it would feel to be a mom or a dad for the first time at age 100? What do you think?
No.
You'd be pretty tired, right?
Pretty tired.
Yeah. And it was all part of God's happy plan. Now watch another short video about Sarah laughing when she heard she would have a baby.
Stories of the Bible. Sarah laughs. This is Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's wife. One day, as Abraham sat near the entrance of his tent, God appeared to him. Abraham looked up and 3 men stood before him. God promised Abraham that he and Sarah would someday have a son. In fact, God promised Abraham that he would have many children. Even more than the stars in the sky. Now, Sarah was very old when God made this promise. When she heard that God promised to give her a child, she laughed. The messenger of God stopped Sarah. He asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah chose to trust God, and she became pregnant and she gave birth to a son. The son's name was Isaac. God's promises came true for Abraham and Sarah. Abraham became the father of many nations, and from his child came children, and from their children, more children, until Abraham's descendants were truly more numerous than the stars in the sky. Abraham and Sarah trusted God for the promise and believed that God was faithful.
Once, all of you were tiny babies just like Isaac. But as you've grown older, you have been able to do more and more things. First, you learned to walk and talk, how to write your name and read, maybe how to tie your shoes and ride a bike. One day, you may even learn to drive a car. That's all part of God's plan for you. Genesis chapter 18, verse 14 says, "Is anything too wonderful for the Lord?" In today's story, we also learn that Abraham, Sarah, and even baby Isaac lived in a tent. In fact, many people in the Middle East and in other areas of the world have lived in tents for thousands of years. People who lived in tents are called nomads. Have you ever slept in a tent? Tents in ancient Israel were made of goat's hair or sheep's wool. They were often built with 2 rooms. The front room was for work, eating, and visiting with friends, kind of like your living room and kitchen. The back room was where the family slept, their bedroom. Today's tents can be made of canvas, nylon, or polyester, and we mostly use tents for camping. I don't think I would actually like to live in one. Would you? Now that the seasons are changing and the days are, and especially the nights are getting colder, I'm very glad I don't live in a tent. Can you name the 4 seasons? Anthony and Jessica, can you name the 4 seasons?
Winter, summer, spring, and fall.
Good. Now let's think about the trees in each season. What color leaves do you see in the spring? Mostly green, right?
Yes, green.
Okay. How about the summer?
Green.
Green, right. How about the fall? Anthony, what colors do we see on the trees in the fall?
Green, red, and yellow.
Right, green, red, yellow, sometimes orange, brown, maybe even purple in some places. And how about in the winter? What colored leaves do we see in the wintertime?
We see none.
Yeah, sometimes we don't see any leaves. Sometimes they might be brown or green, depending on the type of tree. Trees go through changes depending on where they're planted. In colder climates, their leaves might turn orange or even red in the fall. But in warmer climates, things can be quite different. There, a tree might keep its green leaves year-round, even through the winter. It's amazing to watch a tree go through changes each season, from little buds of spring to the shiny leaves of summer to the many colors of fall and finally the bare branches of winter. Trees follow a predictable pattern. This happens year after year. It's all part of God's plan for them. For today's craft, we are going to make leaf prints. Your first job at home is to go outside and find some leaves. Look at all the wonderful leaves that we found. Each one is different, just like each of you are different too. Choose the ones that you like. Leaves have a front and a back. The front of the leaf is smooth. The back has veins, little tubes that carry water and food to the leaves. Let me make that a little closer. So here's the front, and there's the back, and you can see the little veins or tubes. Okay, so for today's craft, all you need is a plain piece of paper, and it can be white, or if you have colored paper that you want to use, you could maybe use that instead. You could try to experiment, and some crayons. So you can put your leaf down with the back side facing up, so not the smooth and the darker side, the lighter side, and then place your paper on top of it. Next, you will run your crayon over your leaf. Okay, so let's give that a try, guys. Okay. And you can use any colors you want for your leaf print. I used purple on mine. That's how mine turned out. And Justin, why don't you hold yours up? You're still working on it. Anthony, how about you? You used red. And Justin, you used green. Good. Send me a picture of your leaf print and it will add them to our We Care for God's Creation bulletin board here at church. If we look closely, we can see God's plan in other areas of nature. What happens in the morning? What happens every morning? The sun does what?
The sun comes up.
Right, the sun rises, and every evening the sun sets. This is another one of God's plans. When you plant a seed, it grows into a plant. God planned for plants to grow from seeds. When plants grow, they flower and make new seeds to plant again. Wow, another one of God's plans. God has a plan for each of us too. We may not know what God's plan is for each of us, but we do know that God has always been and will always be with us at every age. This is part of God's big plan for me and for you. Let's close with a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the gift of Abraham and Sarah who trusted you with patience and love. Thank you for our friends and families, and most of all, for always keeping your promises. Help us to be welcoming and willing to show hospitality to both strangers and to know those we know and love. We ask this in your name. Amen. Thanks for joining us for this week for Virtual Sunday School. See you again next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye.